Let's move on to the implications that process laws are repeatable. And if we look here at the PowerPoint slide, we see that process management systems provide an understanding of why results are as reported. Can you explain why that's true?
Yes. The reason is that traditional accounting, traditional financial reporting, reports results. When we see we made a certain amount of money or we lost a certain amount of money, we don't really know why that is true. So processes provide the explanation of why. Since processes represent the actual work done by the organization, if we delve into each process, find out did it achieve the outcome it was intended or not intended to do, then we can really begin to understand which of the processes are causing the results to be what they are today. That knowledge is going to be critical to organizations, because just knowing that I made money or lost money is just not sufficient in today's environment.
So the second implication is that processes are quantifiable, and processes have resources, and during each stage of the transformation processes they consume these resources, and they have performance by each of these stages. Can you expand upon that?
Yes. One of the pivotal parts of process management is that we are able to actually quantify what goes on. So if we have a process, whether albeit a procurement process, a manufacturing process, a service process, all of them consume resources. And if we look at all our processes, we could explain all the resources we have in the organization. And from that knowledge, we can begin to then ask the question, how effective was each process? How efficient was each process? All of those are essential questions that management needs to address.
Well, it's good that you bring up the factor of effectiveness, Jim, because a lot has been done about making processes efficient, but we don't always think about, is the process effective? I'm doing something, I'm doing it fast, as I get a outcome from that. I may even do it at a low cost, but maybe I shouldn't even be doing it in the first place. Maybe I should be doing something else. So it's good that you're addressing that. The third implication here, Jim, is that process performance is predictable within a range of outcomes. How come I can't throw the ball exactly at 89 miles an hour if I'm a major league pitcher, and why can't I perform processes exactly the same time after time?
Yes, because if we return to the process definition from one of our earlier discussions, the two critical elements are initial conditions and the environment in which we operate. Those are always different. So if they were all identical, then we would be able to fairly accurately be able to look at the transformation logic and predict what was going to happen in the future. But the reality is that those vary, and often very significantly in different organizations. So if we are to understand those initial conditions and environmental factors, then what we can do is we can perhaps shape the process to be more adaptable to those two factors, and then be able to actually come closer to achieving the actual results that we want. The key to transformation logic is we control it. It's a man-made process. We determine the technology, how much the people are involved, how much we depend on the input or the environmental factors. And so the actually very blessed part of process management is that there are many parts of the process that today we're not necessarily controlling, but could control. So a big part of process management is making those very explicit, understanding the risks, how close we're coming to the outcome, how efficient and effective. Then from that, we can do a better job of shaping our processes.
Jim, I don't know if you remember the famous coach, John Wooden, and he was famous for helping basketball players do everything. He would say, I'm going to teach you how to tie your shoes. I'm going to teach you how to roll up your socks. I'm going to teach you how to throw, free throws. And a lot of people made fun of him, but he won 21 titles, so people said, well, maybe you have something there. And I think indirectly he was really applying what you were talking about, because he took and said, well, what's an environment? If I don't tie my shoes right, maybe I don't have that firm grip around my foot, and therefore when I jump, I don't let the ball go exactly the same, and I'm less likely to score. So I think, what you're talking about here is so important, is that we need to understand what are these environmental factors, and obviously some factors would be more important than other factors. But what is important is to understand what the potential factors are in the environment, and then start looking at which ones have a larger impact versus others.
Absolutely. Very critical.
So we'd like to thank you for joining us for this session of our Business Process Management series. We've begun the discussion here on the first process law. In the future tapes, we will talk about the corollaries to this first process law, and then we'll talk about process laws 2, 3, and 4. We appreciate your coming to see us, and Jim Brimson and myself, John Antos, look forward to having you at our next video. My name is John Antos, and this is my good friend Jim Brimson. We'd like to welcome you back to our series on business process management. In previous videos, we've talked about the reason why business process management is the wave of the future in the 21st century. We've spoken about definitions, assumptions, and we began our discussion on the first process law. In this video, we'd like to talk and build on that first process law, and we'd like to talk about the physical capabilities that are embedded in every process and define the functionality of the process, or what some people Jim calls intrinsic processes. So Jim, do you want to start the discussion and talk about that? Implication number 1 is that knowledge attributable to an intrinsic process is applicable to all organizations that employ the process.
Yes. The concept of intrinsic processes is very critical to process management because it bounds a process. It makes it knowledge universal. So let's start off with what do we mean by an intrinsic process? An intrinsic process is where the process is based upon a universal foundation of knowledge. Or a universal way that the process operates. Again, returning to my example of an earlier slide, when you plant an acorn, you get a tree, oak tree. Again, you don't get other type of things. That bounds the process. Similarly, if I am doing payroll, there's only a finite number of ways that you can do payroll. So if you travel the world and you go to organizations throughout the world, you see more similarity than dissimilarity in terms of the basic objective and the technology and the capability of organizations to perform processes. So an intrinsic process means that a process is universal, that there may be multiple ways of doing it, but there's only a finite number of ways of doing it. Now, the reason that this is critical to process theory is 2 things. One of which is it carefully bounds each process so that if we're looking at a personnel process, we don't have to worry about supply chain. The two are just very different. And so by being able to bound a process, we now can better manage it because we don't have to manage 1,000 factors. We have a much smaller finite number of factors. So that's one of the critical elements of an intrinsic process.
So what you're saying, Jim, is payroll process is an example of something that everyone has to do. If you don't pay your employees, obviously you don't have any employees after a while. But some people would fill out a time card and they would write the time card and sign their name to it. Other people would electronically put in their time into a computer system. But the basic process, which is to issue payroll checks or pay employees, is the same for all organizations, but the way they perform that process will be different.
Absolutely.